My name is Daniel, and this happened about 2 years ago when I moved into a small duplex on the outskirts of town. I was fresh out of college, working a night shift security job, and just needed somewhere cheap to sleep during the day. The place was nothing special, but it was quiet and surrounded by mostly older residents. My next-door neighbor, though, was not what I expected. His name was Mr. Harris. Mid-60s, wiry build, thinning gray hair, and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved into a permanent scowl. He never smiled, never waved, just stared whenever I happened to catch his eye. The first strange thing I noticed was how often he stood outside my house at night. Since I worked late shifts, I'd come home around 3 a.m. and sometimes see him in his driveway, just standing there in his robe, facing my house. No smoking, no phone, nothing in his hands, just staring. The first time I thought maybe he was letting his dog out, but I never saw a dog. After the third or fourth time, it stopped feeling like coincidence. One evening, I was unloading groceries from my car when I heard him say my name. Not loudly, not conversationally, more like he was testing the sound of it in his mouth. When I turned, he was leaning against his fence, eyes locked on me. I forced a polite nod and asked if he needed something. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly and walked back inside without a word. A few nights later, after I had gone to bed, I woke to the faint sound of my doorknob rattling. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but it kept going, slow, deliberate clicks like someone trying each turn of the knob carefully. I grabbed my phone and stood in the hallway listening. The moment I stepped closer to the door, the rattling stopped. When I looked through the peephole, the porch was empty. But as I scanned the edge of my front yard, I saw a shadowy figure walking back toward Mr. Harris's house. I told myself it could have been anyone, but my gut knew better. I started double-checking my locks every night and even wedged a chair under the front doorknob when I went to sleep. That should have made me feel safer, but instead it made me realize how much I didn't trust him. Things got worse when I caught him in my backyard one Saturday afternoon. I had been sitting in my living room when I saw movement through the blinds. There he was, walking slowly along my back fence, peering into my windows as if taking inventory of my home. I stormed outside, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. He didn't even flinch. He said he thought he saw something suspicious and wanted to check. When I asked what exactly he saw, he didn't answer. He just smiled for the first time since I'd met him. A week later, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, but something was off. A chair in the kitchen had been moved, and my bedroom closet door, always shut, was wide open. I didn't hear anything in the house, but I called the police anyway. They looked around, found no signs of forced entry, and left with the usual "call us if it happens again." The whole time I couldn't stop thinking about the extra key I'd given the landlord in case of emergencies. 2 nights after that it happened. I was dead asleep when the whispering started. My name, over and over just outside my bedroom window. I froze. My blinds were down, but I could see the faint shape of a head just beyond the glass. I wanted to grab my phone, but I was scared the movement would give me away. The voice kept going, slow and steady, like it was trying to coax me outside. I finally mustered the courage to pull the blinds. Standing there, inches from me, was Mr. Harris. His eyes were wide and his lips were barely moving as he whispered. I shouted, told him to get off my property, and he didn't move at first. Then, with this jerky, unnatural motion, he stepped backward into the darkness. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, his lights were off, and he claimed he had been asleep all night. They said without proof there was nothing they could do. I moved out less than a month later. The day before I left, I was packing up my kitchen when I heard a soft knock at my back door. When I looked, no one was there, but wedged into the door frame was a folded piece of paper. On it, written in shaky handwriting, was a single sentence: "I'll miss our nights together." To this day, I have no idea how he got into my yard without me hearing him. And I'm not sure I want to know. I just hope he never found out where I went. I've lived in my quiet suburban neighborhood for nearly 15 years, and until last year I'd never had a single issue with the people around me. Everyone knew each other's names, we kept our lawns neat, and there was this unspoken agreement to mind our own business but still be friendly. My husband works night shifts at a warehouse, so I'm home alone most evenings. I've always felt safe here. That changed the day a woman named Claire moved into the rental property 2 doors down. At first glance, she was nothing unusual. Mid-30s, slim, shoulder-length black hair. She wore plain clothes and drove an old gray sedan, but something about her felt heavy, like the air around her was harder to breathe when she was near. She moved in on a rainy Tuesday. I remember because I was watching from my kitchen window as she unloaded boxes in the pouring rain without an umbrella. No movers, no family, no friends helping her. She carried every single box herself, and I mean heavy ones too, stacked almost to her chin. At one point, she stopped halfway up the walkway and looked straight at my window. I froze, thinking she couldn't possibly see me from that distance. But I swear to you, she tilted her head like she was studying me, then turned away and went inside. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly curiosity, but I didn't like the way it made my stomach tighten. For the first few weeks, I hardly saw her during the day. Her curtains stayed drawn, and her car was always gone by morning. Sometimes I'd hear her front door slam in the middle of the night, followed by the slow crunch of her footsteps on the gravel driveway. One night I woke up at around 2:30 to get some water. I made the mistake of glancing outside. She was in her driveway again, facing my house. No phone in her hand, no cigarette, no reason to be standing there. Just watching. I ducked out of sight, heart pounding. When I peeked again a minute later, she was gone. I wanted to believe she'd just gone inside, but the way the shadows played on the street made it hard to tell if she was standing somewhere else, hidden. Things escalated about a month after she moved in. My husband was working late again, and I was settling into bed with a book when I heard 3 faint knocks at my front door. They weren't loud enough to be a friend or delivery driver, but just insistent enough that I knew they were intentional. I almost ignored it, thinking maybe it was a package drop, but something made me look through the peephole. There she was, standing perfectly still, eyes locked right on the peephole. It startled me so badly I stumbled back from the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I stood there frozen until I heard her walk away. The sound of her shoes scraping against the front steps lingered longer than it should have, like she was dragging her feet on purpose. From then on, I started noticing her more, and in ways I couldn't explain. If I was in my backyard hanging laundry, I'd catch movement through the gaps in my fence. I'd glance over and see her leaning slightly to the side, just enough to peek through. If I was pulling into my driveway after errands, I'd see her curtains shift in that subtle, unmistakable way that meant someone was watching. It wasn't constant, but often enough that I began dreading coming home after dark. I told my husband, but he thought I was reading too much into it. "She's probably just lonely," he said. "Try talking to her." But the thing is, I'd never once seen her smile in passing or wave at a neighbor. She didn't walk her dog because she didn't have one. She didn't check her mail when others were around. She moved through the neighborhood like she was trying not to exist, except when it came to me. The breaking point came one night when I was home alone, watching TV in the living room. My couch faces a big front window and I usually keep the blinds closed, but that night they were slightly open. Out of nowhere, I got this prickling feeling between my shoulder blades. I looked toward the window and there she was outside on the sidewalk staring in at me. Her face was partially obscured by the glare of the street lamp, but I could see her eyes, wide, unblinking. I shot up and yanked the blinds shut so fast my hand stung from the cord snapping. I stood there in the dark for a long time, listening for footsteps but heard nothing. By the time I worked up the courage to look again, she was gone. I started keeping my doors locked at all times and double-checking the windows before bed. But 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of my back gate creaking open. It was after 1 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and crept to the kitchen, which overlooks the backyard. My motion light flicked on just as I looked outside. Claire was standing at the base of my porch steps, staring up at my back door. She didn't flinch when the light hit her. She didn't run. She just looked, tilting her head slowly like she was listening for something inside the house. I wanted to scream at her, but my throat closed up. I called 911 instead, whispering to the operator. As soon as I gave my address, Claire turned and walked back toward the gate, slipping into the shadows before the cops arrived. They searched the area, but she was gone. After that, I barely saw her for a while, which was almost worse. Her car still came and went at odd hours, but she didn't linger outside anymore. I convinced myself maybe she'd gotten the message. That illusion shattered one Saturday morning when I stepped outside to grab the mail. In my mailbox, tucked between bills and flyers, was a single sheet of paper folded twice. No envelope. Inside, in neat, blocky handwriting, it read, "I like watching you when you don't know I'm there." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. My hands shook so badly I dropped it right there on the sidewalk. I ran inside, locked the door, and called the police again. They took the note but couldn't prove anything without fingerprints, which the rain that morning had probably ruined. The final straw happened less than a week later. My husband was on another overnight shift, and I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. The faint creak of my bedroom door. My stomach dropped. I sleep with it shut, and I knew I hadn't opened it. I sat up, heart hammering, and in the faint light from my street-facing window, I saw the edge of the door shift just slightly, like someone had nudged it open. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, but before I could, I heard the sound of footsteps running down the hallway toward the back of the house. I leapt out of bed and locked myself in the bathroom, calling the police with shaking hands. When they arrived, they found my back door unlocked. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. Claire's car was gone by the time they checked her house. I haven't seen her since that night. The landlord put the property back up for rent a month later, saying she'd left without notice. No one knows where she went. Sometimes I tell myself she's gone for good, but every so often late at night, I'll glance out my window and swear I see a slim figure standing at the far end of the street, just beyond the reach of the lamplight, facing my house. I moved into my current house last fall, thinking I had scored a quiet, safe place to settle into after years of bouncing between apartments. The street was peaceful, lined with old maple trees and the kind of houses that looked like they'd been here for generations. It was the kind of neighborhood where you expected to see kids playing outside, parents chatting on porches, and the occasional backyard barbecue. My place was a modest 2-story home. Nothing fancy, but it had a small garden out back and enough space for me to work from home comfortably. On one side of my house, there was a young couple with a toddler. On the other side was the kind of neighbor you never forget. His name was Mr. Hanley. Mr. Hanley was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Lived alone. The first time I saw him, I was unloading boxes from my car, and he just stood on his porch watching me. Not waving, not smiling, just watching. When I finally made eye contact and offered a, "Hey, how's it going?" he gave me the faintest nod before turning and disappearing inside. It was odd, but I figured maybe he was just one of those old guys who kept to himself. The house he lived in was noticeably darker than the others. Heavy curtains covered every window. The lawn was trimmed, but there were no flowers, no decorations, nothing that hinted at warmth. For the first month, things were uneventful. I'd sometimes see Mr. Hanley out front late at night, just standing in his yard, looking down the street like he was waiting for something. Once I saw him at nearly 2 in the morning, dressed in the same old cardigan he always wore, staring toward the intersection as a light drizzle fell. I told myself it was harmless. People have their quirks. But then in late November, I started hearing the sounds. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I woke up to what sounded like faint tapping coming from the shared wall between our houses. My bedroom is on the side facing his home, so at first I thought maybe he was doing some late-night repairs. But the sound was rhythmic almost, deliberate. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. I lay there listening for a while before it stopped. The next night, the same thing happened, but this time, it was followed by something stranger. A low hum, almost like a generator or an engine running. It went on for a good 10 minutes before going silent. I decided to casually ask the couple on the other side of me if they'd ever noticed anything weird coming from Hanley's place. They exchanged a quick look before the husband said, "We don't really talk to him. Best to keep it that way." I laughed it off like I understood, but deep down, it only made me more curious. That week, I started keeping my upstairs blinds slightly open at night, just enough so I could glance toward his house without being obvious. Most nights it was dark, but one Wednesday around 2 a.m., I saw a light flick on in what I assumed was his basement. Moments later, I noticed shadows moving across the curtains, 2 shadows, not one. That was the first time I realized there might be someone else in there with him. The next day, I saw Mr. Hanley carrying something large wrapped in a black tarp from his garage to the basement door on the side of his house. It looked heavy, the way he was straining under the weight, and the shape was odd. Too long to be a box, too stiff to be a bag of clothes. I stood frozen at my upstairs window, telling myself it could be anything. Yard tools, old furniture, anything. But deep down my stomach was tight. A few nights later I woke to that humming again, only louder this time. Then came the tapping. Except now it wasn't just against the wall. It was followed by a scraping sound like something being dragged slowly across the floor. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and moved to my window. The basement light was on again, and shadows moved in jerky, unsettling ways like someone struggling with something. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? My neighbor is making weird noises? They'd think I was paranoid. Then came the night I can't shake from my mind. I was working late in my upstairs office, trying to meet a deadline, when I heard it. A single sharp knock at my back door. I froze, staring toward the dark kitchen. Another knock, this time softer, almost testing. Against my better judgment, I crept downstairs and peeked out the side window toward the backyard. That's when I saw him. Mr. Hanley, standing completely still in the shadow of my porch. His face just barely visible in the dim light. He wasn't smiling, wasn't speaking, just standing there. I didn't move. After what felt like forever, he stepped back into the darkness and vanished between our houses. The next morning, I noticed something new. In the narrow strip of dirt between our homes, there were fresh shovel marks. The soil was darker, damp, like it had just been turned over. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I've never confronted him, never mentioned what I've seen or heard. And I haven't called the cops because every time I think about it, I imagine him at my back door again. Only this time he wouldn't knock. That was 4 months ago. The noises have gotten less frequent, but every so often I still hear that tapping, faint but deliberate, coming through the wall late at night. Sometimes I think I hear muffled voices, but when I press my ear to the wall, it stops. My other neighbors seem oblivious, or maybe they're just too scared to talk about it. I've started keeping my blinds closed at all times, but I still catch myself glancing toward his basement door. I know I should move, but a part of me feels like if I leave, I'll never find out what's really going on in there. And that thought scares me almost as much as staying.